The wind carried the scent of freshly tilled earth as Ronan Hale tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his battered old truck. The road stretched endlessly ahead, leading him and his daughter toward yet another uncertain destination. A single dad, down on his luck, searching for work, searching for something solid beneath his feet. But fate had other plans. A few miles ahead, stranded in the middle of a vast golden field, stood a rusty, broken-down tractor, and beside it, a woman whose piercing gaze held more secrets than she let on. Ronan had no idea that stopping to help would change everything, that the woman before him, Celine Whitmore, wasn't just a struggling farmer. She was the owner of thousands of acres of prime farmland and the last defense against a corporate giant threatening to swallow her legacy whole. One act of kindness would set off a chain of events neither of them could have predicted. Could an unlikely partnership become the key to saving a farm? Could a man who had spent his life fixing broken things find a place where he truly belonged? There's only one way to find out. Before we dive into this unforgettable story, make sure to subscribe if you love tales of resilience, heartwarming romance, and the incredible power of kindness. This is a journey of hope, love, and second chances set against the breathtaking backdrop of America's heartland. Now let's begin. The sun hung low over the vast expanse of golden fields, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It was the kind of autumn afternoon that painted the American heartland in shades of fire and amber, a quiet beauty that could steal the breath from any wandering soul if they had the time to notice. Ronan Hale didn't. His battered old truck rattled down the dusty county road, tires kicking up clouds of dirt as he focused on the road ahead. His hands, calloused from years of work, gripped the wheel with a tension that had become second nature. The map on the passenger seat was marked with circles, places he'd tried, doors that had already closed. Job hunting wasn't easy when you had nothing left to your name except a few tools, a pile of unpaid bills, and an 8-year-old daughter sleeping in the back seat. Lily. Ronan glanced in the rearview mirror, his heart softening at the sight of his little girl curled up under his old flannel shirt, her dark curls spilling across the seat. She had been a trooper through it all, never complaining, always trusting him to make things right. He had to. A loud bang interrupted his thoughts. Ahead, on the side of the road, a large red tractor sat at an awkward angle, steam billowing from its hood. A woman stood beside it, her arms crossed, staring at the machine with a mixture of frustration and determination. Ronan didn't hesitate. He pulled over, his truck groaning in protest. The woman turned as he stepped out, brushing a strand of chestnut hair from her face. She was tall, with a presence that was both commanding and weary. Her denim jeans and work boots were coated in dust, and the sleeves of her flannel shirt were rolled up, revealing tanned forearms. She looked like she belonged to this land, as much a part of it as the sky and soil. "You need a hand?" Ronan called, pushing his baseball cap back. The woman exhaled, clearly weighing her options. "Unless you happen to have a miracle in your toolbox," Ronan smirked. "I can take a look." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Be my guest. I'm Celine." He wiped his hands on his jeans and popped the hood, immediately spotting the problem. The radiator hose had come loose, and coolant was everywhere. Not a disaster, but bad enough that the tractor wasn't going anywhere on its own. "This your land?" Ronan asked, glancing around. Celine nodded, her gaze following his. "Whitmore Acres, my family's farm." It was then that Ronan really took in his surroundings, the sheer vastness of it. Rolling fields stretched in every direction, the golden crops swaying with the breeze. It wasn't just a small family farm. This was an empire of land, the kind that took generations to build. He whistled low. "Hell of a place," Selina gave a short, almost self-conscious laugh. Yeah, guess it is. Ronan didn't pry. Instead, he got to work. Selina watched as he moved with quiet efficiency, his hands steady, his focus unshaken. There was something about him, something solid, dependable. She had spent her life surrounded by men who either wanted to take over her land or impress her with their wealth. This man seemed different. You're good at this, she commented. Ronan shrugged. Spent years fixing things that were broken. Something about the way he said it made Selina pause, but she didn't push. Within minutes, he had the hose secured, the clamps tightened. Should hold until you can get a proper replacement, he said, wiping his hands. Selina exhaled. You just saved me a 2-hour walk back to the farmhouse. Thanks. No problem. Ronan glanced toward his truck, where Lily was now sitting, up rubbing her eyes. We were just passing through. Selina followed his gaze. Your daughter? He nodded. Lily. Selina studied him. He didn't just look tired. He looked worn, like a man who had carried too much for too long. You looking for work? Ronan blinked. What? She gestured to the tractor. I could use someone who knows how to fix things. Farmhands are great, but machinery is its own beast. I need someone who can keep it running. Ronan hesitated. He had spent so long chasing jobs, moving from town to town, never staying still. This was different. This was stability, but stability came with risk. Still, Lily's voice cut through his doubts. Daddy, are we staying here? He looked down at her small face, her hopeful eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't have the heart to say no. Selina extended a hand. What do you say? Ronan met her gaze, then shook her hand, his grip firm. I say, let's see where this road leads. The morning sun broke over the rolling fields of Whitmore Acres, casting long golden shadows across the land. It was a crisp, late autumn dawn, the kind that made the air sharp and clean, filled with the scent of damp earth and harvested crops. For Ronan Hale, it was an unfamiliar sight. Standing on the porch of the farmhouse, he took a slow sip of the coffee Selina had handed him, his gaze sweeping across the vast landscape. It had been years since he'd last stood in a place so open, so untamed. The cities he'd drifted through had always felt suffocating, too full of noise and steel. This was different. A creak of wood behind him made him turn. Lily stood in the doorway, wrapped in his flannel shirt, rubbing sleep. From her eyes, Daddy. Are we really staying here? She mumbled. Ronan crouched to her level, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. For now, sweetheart, let's see how things go, okay? Lily nodded, trusting his answer the way she always did. That trust made his chest tighten. He had let her down before. He didn't want to do it again. Selina stepped outside, tucking her hands into the pockets of her work jeans. You're up early, Ronan smirked. Force of habit. Good. She nodded toward the barn. Boone will be expecting you in 10 minutes. He'll show you the ropes. Ronan followed her. Gaze. In the distance, an older man with a weathered face and a posture as solid as an oak tree was unloading supplies from a truck. Boone Calloway. Ronan had met him briefly the night before. A man of few words, but a keen observer. He had sized Ronan, up with one sharp glance, and given a single nod, approval, skepticism. Ronan wasn't sure, but he'd earned his place in tougher crowds before. The barn was alive with movement when Ronan arrived. The scent of hay mixed with engine grease, and the distant sound of livestock echoed through the rafters. Boone didn't look up from where he was tightening a bolt on a rusted plow. Glad you didn't run off, the older man remarked. Ronan raised an eyebrow. Not yet, anyway. Boone grunted in amusement, handing Ronan a wrench. Let's see if you actually know your way around machines, city boy. Ronan knelt beside the plough, inspecting the worn-down mechanism. Years of rust and neglect had made it sluggish, but the core structure was still sound. He adjusted the wrench, tightening a bolt with practiced ease. "Not bad," Boone muttered. "What else do you see?" Ronan ran a hand along the axle, feeling the uneven wear. "Your front wheels are off balance, too much weight shifting to one side. If it keeps up, it'll snap in a few months." Boone nodded, impressed. "And the engine?" Ronan stood, wiping his hands. "Needs new fuel filters. You're pushing it too hard." A slow smile tugged at the corners of Boone's mouth. "All right, you're not useless," Ronan chuckled. "High praise." Boone clapped him on the shoulder. "Come on then, I'll show you where we keep the real messes." The day passed in a blur of work, fixing a broken water pump, welding a cracked trailer hitch, rewiring an old generator. Ronan lost himself in the rhythm of it, the satisfaction of repairing something tangible. It was a rare feeling, to build, instead of just scraping by. By midday, the sun was hot, and the air smelled of wheat and gasoline. As Ronan wiped sweat from his brow, Celine approached, carrying a metal lunchbox in one hand and a curious expression on her face. "You haven't stopped all morning," she remarked. Ronan took the lunchbox with a nod of thanks. "Keeps me busy." Celine leaned against the fence, watching him. "You're good at this," Ronan shrugged. "Been fixing things my whole life." Celine hesitated, as if weighing her next words. "Where were you before this?" Ronan exhaled. Slowly, he could give her the short version: Detroit, a failing auto shop, the slow collapse of everything he had built. But there were some stories that were easier left untold. "On the road," he said simply. Celine didn't press, just nodded. "Well, the work's here if you want it." Something in her tone made him pause. It wasn't just an offer of employment, it was something more. A quiet acknowledgement that he wasn't just another worker passing through. For the first time in a long time, Ronan felt the possibility of staying. That evening, as the sky turned to lavender and gold, Ronan sat on the porch, watching Lily chase fireflies in the tall grass. Her laughter echoed across the land, light and free in a way he hadn't heard in years. Selene stepped outside, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. She handed him one, then leaned against the porch railing. "Your daughter seems happy here," she said. Ronan nodded. "She likes open spaces. She's never had much of that before." Celine took a slow sip of coffee. "You could stay." Ronan turned to her. "Is that an invitation?" Celine held his gaze, her expression unreadable. "It's an option." He let the words settle between them. For the first time in years, Ronan wasn't running. He wasn't packing up to leave before the sun rose. For the first time in years, he was considering staying. The morning mist clung to the fields as Ronan rolled up his sleeves, stepping out onto the damp soil of Whitmore Acres. The scent of fresh earth and morning dew mixed with the faint trace of gasoline lingering on his hands. It had been only a few days since he'd agreed to stay, but already the farm had a way of settling into his bones. Boone was waiting for him near the machinery shed, arms crossed, his gaze sharp as ever. "Hope you're not sore from yesterday," the older man remarked. Ronan smirked. "I've worked through worse." Boone handed him a wrench. "Good, because today we've got real work to do." He led Ronan toward the east fields, where an old irrigation system had been malfunctioning for weeks. Water pooled unevenly in the furrows, drowning some crops while leaving others bone dry. Celine had mentioned it in passing the night before, her frustration barely hidden behind the calm exterior she wore so well. They arrived at the rusted water pump, its gears groaning. In protest, Boone knelt down, muttering under his breath, "Damn thing's been acting up for years." That guy who worked on it barely kept it running. Ronan studied the machine, running his fingers over the corroded pipes. "It's not just the pump," he said. "The whole system's out of balance. The pressure's off, and it's wearing." Everything down, Boone raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? Ronan gave him a look. You want it fixed, or you want to keep throwing patches on it? The older man let out a short chuckle. Fair enough. Let's get to work. They spent the next few hours dismantling the pump, working in a comfortable silence. Boone, despite his rough edges, had a sharp mind. He knew the land the way Ronan knew engines, by instinct, by years of trial and error. At one point, Boone leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. So you're really planning on sticking around? Ronan tightened a bolt. Seems that way. Boone nodded, as if testing the words. Celine's tough, but she's been carrying this place on her back for too long. Ronan didn't look up. She doesn't strike me as someone who needs saving, Boone smirked. No, but even the strongest shoulders have limits. As the afternoon stretched on, Ronan returned to the farmhouse, his muscles aching but his mind clear. He was beginning to understand the rhythm of the land, the endless demands, the quiet victories of a well-run farm. Celine was standing by the wooden fence, watching over a group of farmhands loading hay onto a trailer. Her posture was relaxed, but Ronan could see the calculated awareness in her gaze, a woman who had learned to always be in control. He leaned against the fence beside her. Water systems patched up, should hold until we can replace the pipes. Celine turned to him, surprised. That was fast, Ronan shrugged. Not my first time fixing something held together by rust and prayer. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I appreciate it. They stood there in silence for a moment, the golden light of late afternoon casting long shadows across the fields. Then Celine spoke, her voice quieter. My father used to say a farm is only as strong as the people who keep it running. Ronan glanced at her. Sounds like he was a smart man. Celine's expression darkened just for a second. He was. But he was also stubborn. Always thought he had to do everything himself. Ronan studied her profile, the sharp angles, softened by the sunlight, the way her fingers absently tapped against the fence post. Sounds familiar, he murmured. Celine turned to him, eyes narrowing slightly. But there was no real irritation, just the unspoken challenge between two people who recognized a similar fire in each other. Before she could respond, a voice called from the distance. Miss Whitmore. They turned to see Everett Monroe, dressed in his usual clean-cut suit, despite the dust swirling in the air. His presence was like an intrusion, out of place among the raw honesty of the farm. Ronan felt the shift in Celine immediately. Her shoulders squared, her expression smoothing into something unreadable. Everett stopped a few feet away, offering a rehearsed smile. I was hoping to catch you before you got too busy. Celine's voice was polite, but cool. What do you want, Everett? Everett gestured toward the fields. I heard you've been dealing with equipment failures. A farm this size needs modern infrastructure, Celine. You know my offer still stands. Ronan's jaw tightened. So this was the guy trying to buy her out. Celine's fingers clenched against the fence. I told you the farm's not for sale. Everett sighed, as if she were being unreasonable. Come on, Celine. You can't keep fighting this battle alone. Let me help. Ronan watched the exchange carefully. There was something in Everett's tone, not concern, but condescension. Celine held her ground. I don't need your help, and I don't appreciate you showing up unannounced. Everett's jaw twitched, but he kept his smile in place. His gaze flicked to Ronan, assessing. And who's this? Ronan stepped forward slightly, his presence solid. Ronan Hale. Everett's lips curled in a smirk. Ah, the mechanic. How quaint. Ronan didn't bite. He'd met men like Everett before, the kind who thought money made them superior. Celine crossed her arms. We're done here, Everett. Everett exhaled through his nose, clearly annoyed. Fine, but don't. Forget you have options. With that, he turned and walked back toward his car, the tires kicking up dust as he pulled away. As soon as he was gone, Ronan let out a low whistle. That guy always this charming, Celine sighed, running a hand through her hair. Everett's been trying to buy up farmland all over the county. He thinks he's the future of agriculture. Ronan frowned. And you don't? Celine shook her head. I think the future should be built by people who actually care about the land. Ronan considered that. He had spent years drifting, fixing things that weren't his, never leaving a mark. But here, in this place, he was beginning to understand something. Maybe Celine wasn't just holding on to this land out of pride. Maybe it was something deeper, a fight for something worth preserving. And for the first time, Ronan wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was a fight he could be part of. The sky over Whitmore Acres stretched wide and endless, painted in soft hues of pink and gold as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The air was thick with the scent of earth, hay, and the lingering memory of a long day's work. Ronan Hale stood near the barn, wiping the grease from his hands with an old rag. The farm had a way of settling into his muscles, its rhythm becoming his own. He hadn't planned on staying, hadn't planned on belonging anywhere again, but the days had begun to string together like an old melody, one he hadn't realized he missed. Lily was sitting on a hay bale a few feet away, swinging her legs as she watched the farmhands finishing up for the evening. Celine stood near the fence, speaking in hushed tones with Boone. From the stiffness of her posture, Ronan could tell something was wrong. He wasn't the type to pry, but something about Celine's shoulders, the way they carried too much weight, too much unspoken burden, made him walk over. Boone caught sight of him first and nodded. Figured you'd be interested in this? Celine exhaled, rubbing her temple before turning to Ronan. Everett's not just making offers anymore. He's making moves, Ronan frowned. What kind of moves? Celine handed him a stack of official-looking documents. He scanned the pages quickly, his sharp eyes catching words like land assessment, water rights, and government buyout incentives. This is bad, Ronan muttered. Boone grunted. No kidding, Celine crossed her arms. Everett's been buying up small farms on the outskirts, consolidating them under his agribusiness model. He's lobbying for zoning changes that could make it impossible for independent farmers to compete. Ronan narrowed his eyes. And Whitmore Acres? Celine's jaw tightened. We're the last holdout. If we go under, so does everyone else in this county who's still fighting to keep their land. Ronan let out a slow breath, his mind already working through the implications. So that's why he was so damn smug. Boone folded his arms. Everett thinks he can wait her out. He's banking on Celine getting tired, making a mistake, or running out of options. Ronan shook his head. Does he even know who he's up against? A ghost of a smile flickered across Celine's lips. He's about to find out. Later that evening, as the farm quieted under the weight of twilight, Ronan found Celine in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. The rhythmic motion of her hands against the animal's coat seemed to steady her, grounding her in the one thing that remained constant: this land, this farm, this fight. Ronan leaned against the stall, watching her for a moment before speaking. So what's the plan? Celine didn't look up. You assume I have one? Ronan smirked. I assume you're not the type to just roll over. She let out a soft chuckle. No, I'm not. She set the brush down and turned to face him, her gaze sharp but not unkind. The land is my leverage. Everett might have money and influence, but he doesn't have the one thing he wants most: control of Whitmore Acres. Ronan crossed his arms. And how do we make sure he never gets it? Celine hesitated. I have an idea. But it's risky. Ronan arched an eyebrow. Let's hear it. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Everett's whole plan hinges on public perception. He's banking on the idea that small farms are dying, that industrialized agriculture is the only way forward. But if we prove him wrong, if we make Whitmore Acres thrive in a way that can't be ignored, we might be able to turn the tide. Ronan tilted his head. And how do we do that? Celine's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. By rebuilding, expanding, showing the entire damn state that a family-run farm isn't a relic of the past, it's the future. Ronan whistled. That's ambitious. Celine's lips curved into a smirk. Scared? Ronan chuckled. Of a challenge? Never. There was a beat of silence between them, something unspoken hanging in the air. Celine glanced down, as if realizing how close they were standing. She took a small step back, clearing her throat. We'll start tomorrow. Boone and I will go over the numbers, figure out what resources we can pull together. In the meantime, I need you to do something for me. Ronan met her gaze. Name it. Selina hesitated, then finally said, Fix the old tractor. Ronan blinked. The one in the shed. The thing's barely held together with rust and luck. Celine gave a small, knowing smile. Exactly. If you can bring it back to life, maybe there's hope for the rest of us. Ronan shook his head, but there was something else in his expression now, a quiet determination, a challenge he was willing to take. All right, Whitmore, let's see if we can make a miracle happen. That night, as Ronan lay awake in the small guest cabin Celine had offered him and Lily, he found himself staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Lily was asleep in the next room, her soft breathing, the only sound in the quiet farmhouse. Ronan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He had spent years drifting, running, fixing things that were never his to keep. But here, for the first time in a long time, he wanted to stay. Not just for the work, not just for the fight, but for something deeper, for a woman who carried the weight of an entire farm on her shoulders, but still found the strength to fight. For a little girl who deserved a home that didn't feel temporary. For himself, because maybe, just maybe, this was a place worth fixing. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp soil and freshly cut hay. Ronan Hale stood in front of the old tractor, arms crossed, surveying the rusted beast with a mixture of amusement and challenge. The thing was ancient, its faded red paint peeling away, exposing the worn metal beneath. It looked as if it had seen better days, long before he was even born. He glanced toward the barn, where Celine was speaking with Boone about the upcoming harvest. Her posture was tense, the weight of Everett's looming threat pressing heavily on her shoulders. She needed a win, and if fixing this damn tractor gave her even a small one, then that was exactly what he was going to do. Ronan grabbed his toolbox and got to work. The tractor's engine was a mess. Corroded wires, clogged fuel lines, an oil leak that had gone unchecked for years. He muttered under his breath. This thing's not just broken, it's a crime scene. Boone, who had wandered over to watch, let out a dry chuckle. Towed her to junket years ago. Ronan wiped his hands on his jeans, shaking his head. Nah, she wouldn't let go of it, would she? Boone leaned against the barn wall, arms crossed. Nope, it was her father's. Ronan exhaled slowly. That explained a lot. Celine wasn't just fighting to keep the farm, she was fighting to hold on to the past. He turned back to the tractor, rolling up his sleeves. Well then, guess I better not let her down. As Ronan worked, the farm hummed with life around him. Lily sat nearby on an overturned bucket, watching him with fascination, occasionally handing him a wrench when he needed it. You really think you can fix it, Daddy? She asked, her small fingers tracing patterns in the dust on the tractor's side. Ronan smiled, tapping the wrench against his palm. I think we won't know unless we try. Lily beamed. Then you can fix anything. His chest tightened at her words. If only life were that simple, Later in the afternoon, as Ronan wiped grease from his hands, Celine approached, arms crossed. "You're really putting all this effort into something that might not even run?" she asked, tilting her head. Ronan smirked. "You kept it all these years, hoping it would." She hesitated, then looked away. "It was my father's pride and joy. He used to say, 'A farm is only as strong as the hands that keep it running.'" Ronan nodded toward the tractor. "Then let's make sure those hands didn't work for nothing." Celine studied him for a long moment before sighing. Her tough exterior cracking just a little. "I just don't want to hope for something that won't happen." Ronan met her gaze, his voice steady. "Maybe it's not about hoping. Maybe it's about making it happen." Celine blinked, as if she wasn't used to people believing in things the way he did. Then with a small, almost reluctant smile, she nodded. "All right, mechanic, let's see what you've got." As the sky darkened, Ronan kept working. His fingers were numb from the cold, his muscles sore, but he was close. Boone had long since retired for the night. Even Lily had curled up in the barn loft, dozing off under a blanket. Celine, however, hadn't left. She stood nearby, hands in her jacket pockets, watching as he tested the fuel pump again. "Nothing." Ronan muttered a curse under his breath, slamming the hood shut. Celine exhaled. "Ronan, it's late. Maybe—" But before she could finish, he turned the key again. A loud cough, a sputter, a pause, then a deep, rumbling growl. The tractor came to life. Celine's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly as if she couldn't believe it. Ronan grinned. "Told you." For a second, neither of them moved. Then Celine let out a breathless laugh, a sound so rare, so unexpected, that it made Ronan's chest tighten. She stepped forward, running a hand over the tractor's side, as if afraid it would disappear. "I can't believe you did it." Ronan wiped his hands on a rag, smirking. "Never doubted it for a second." She turned to him, eyes shining in the dim light. There was something unspoken between them, something fragile but real, a kind of understanding, a kind of trust. "Thank you," she said softly. And for the first time since arriving at Whitmore Acres, Ronan realized he wasn't just fixing machines anymore, he was fixing something much bigger. The morning after the tractor roared back to life, Whitmore Acres felt different. It wasn't just the machine running again, it was something deeper, something unspoken that hummed beneath the surface. Celine Whitmore had spent years carrying this farm alone, fighting off people like Everett Monroe, battling droughts, balancing books that never quite seemed to settle. She'd always relied on herself, because in the end, that was the only certainty she knew. But now, as she walked past the barn where Ronan was working, tools in hand, she didn't feel quite so alone anymore. Boone whistled as he ran a hand along the tractor's freshly oiled frame. "Damn thing looks almost brand new," Ronan smirked, wiping grease from his hands. "Give it a few months of work and it'll look old again." Celine stood beside them, her arms crossed, but there was no mistaking the glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "I have to admit," she said, "I didn't think you could pull it off." Ronan raised an eyebrow. "That makes two of us." Boone chuckled, shaking his head as he walked off. "You two keep this up, and people might start thinking you actually get along." Celine rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Ronan leaned against the tractor, looking at her. "You gonna tell me why this thing mattered so much?" She hesitated for just a second, then ran a hand over the hood. "It was my father's. He bought it when I was a kid. We used to ride on it together during harvest season. Back when things were simpler." Ronan didn't say anything for a moment, just nodded. "Guess it's good as new, then." Celine met his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "Yeah, it is." Then she glanced at the sky. The storm clouds were rolling in, dark and heavy on the horizon, and just like that, reality returned. By noon, the wind had picked up, whistling through the fields with an urgency that made even the most seasoned farmhands exchange wary glances. Ronan had seen storms before, brutal, merciless ones that tore through land like a beast with no master. He could feel it in the air now, the way everything seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Celine stood on the farmhouse porch, hands on her hips as she surveyed the approaching front. "We need to move fast," she said, voice sharp and focused. "The wheat's ready for harvest. If we don't get as much in as we can before the storm hits, we could lose half of it." Boone nodded. "I'll get the crews started." Ronan took a step forward. "What do you need me to do?" Celine didn't hesitate. "Take the tractor. The ground's already damp, so we can't afford to waste time. Get out there and help bring the last of the wheat in." He nodded. "Got it." As the crew scrambled into action, Lily came running out of the house, her eyes wide. "Daddy, is it gonna be bad?" Ronan crouched, resting a hand on her shoulder. "It'll be all right, sweetheart. We're just getting ready, just in case." Lily chewed her lip, then glanced at Celine. "Can we help?" Celine studied the little girl. For a moment, then surprised them both by saying, "Yeah, we could use an extra pair of hands in the barn." Lily beamed, and Ronan felt something in his chest tighten. Celine wasn't just letting him in, she was letting his daughter in too. The wind howled as Ronan gripped the tractor's steering wheel, guiding it through the fields. The freshly repaired engine rumbled beneath him, holding steady despite the uneven rain-soaked earth. Farmhands worked in a frenzied but coordinated effort, tossing wheat into the trailers as quickly as they could. Boone drove one of the larger trucks, his face set in grim determination. Overhead, the clouds grew darker, pressing down like a weight against the sky. Celine's voice crackled through the two-way radio, clipped to Ronan's belt. "How's it looking?" He pressed the button. "We're moving fast, but the wind's picking up." A pause. Then, "Keep going." Ronan didn't argue. He knew what was at stake. They had just finished loading the last of the wheat onto the trucks when the first drops of rain began to fall. Fat, heavy drops that smacked against the dry earth like warning shots. Then in an instant, the sky split open. The rain came hard and fast, slamming against the ground, the wind tearing through the fields like an invisible beast. Ronan jumped down. From the tractor, running toward the barn where Celine was ushering the last of the workers inside. Lily clung to Celine's hand, her hair whipping in the wind. "Go!" Celine shouted, waving him in. Ronan barely made it through the doors before Boone slammed them shut behind him. The storm raged outside, rattling the barn's wooden frame. The sound of rain pounding against the roof was deafening. Ronan turned to Celine. "Everyone accounted for?" She nodded, breathless. "Yeah, we got everything in just in time." A collective sigh of relief went through the group, but Celine's shoulders remained tense, because this wasn't just about surviving the storm. This was about surviving everything else that was still coming. As the workers sat together, waiting out the worst of the storm, Ronan found himself leaning against a wooden beam, watching Celine as she stood near the doors. She looked exhausted, but more than that, she looked determined. He walked over. "You okay?" She let out a breath, nodding. "We made it through this one." Ronan studied her. "You ever get tired of fighting?" Celine gave a short, almost bitter laugh. "Every damn day." "Then why keep going?" She turned to him, her gaze steady. "Because if I don't, who will?" For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain and the distant roll of thunder. Ronan ran a hand through his damp hair. "You don't have to do it alone, you know." Celine hesitated, and in that hesitation, Ronan saw the first crack in the wall she had spent years building. The morning after the storm, Whitmore Acres was still standing. The sky was clear, washed clean by the torrential rain, and the scent of wet earth lingered in the air. The land had taken a beating. Branches littered the fields, puddles of water, pooled in uneven patches, and some of the fencing had come loose. But the wheat had been saved, the livestock was unharmed, and the farm was still intact. Celine Whitmore stood by the porch, arms crossed, surveying the damage with an unreadable expression. Ronan Hale leaned against one of the fence posts beside her, watching as the farmhands began clearing debris. His muscles ached from the long hours yesterday, but it was the kind of exhaustion that felt good, the kind that came from fighting for something real. "You should be proud," he said finally. Selene turned to him, frowning. "Proud of what?" Ronan gestured toward the land. "Everything that could have gone wrong last night didn't. We got the harvest in, kept everyone safe. That doesn't happen by accident." Selene exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. She wasn't used to letting herself acknowledge small victories, but this was a victory. By midday, Boone rode up on horseback, his face set in a deep scowl. "We've got trouble," he announced, pulling up near Selene and Ronan. Selene stiffened. "What kind of trouble?" Boone dismounted and handed her a letter, creased from where he had crumpled it in frustration. Selene unfolded the paper, scanning the official-looking document. Her jaw tightened. Ronan frowned. "What is it?" Boone crossed his arms. "Everett, he's pressuring the county to rezone some of the farmland, claiming it's underutilized. If he gets his way, Whitmore Acres could lose a chunk of land." Ronan swore under his breath. "Can he even do that?" Selene's fingers clenched around the paper. "With enough money and influence?" "Yes." Boone nodded grimly. "It'd force us into a corner. Less land means lower production. Lower production means we can't stay competitive. He's trying to starve us out." Ronan's jaw tightened. Everett Monroe wasn't just playing hardball. He was trying to strangle the farm into submission. Selene let out a slow, measured breath, but Ronan could see the fire behind her eyes. "Then we fight," she said. Ronan tilted his head. "You got a plan?" Selene nodded. "I do now." That evening, Ronan drove Selene into town for a community meeting where local farmers were gathering to discuss the proposed rezoning. The tension was thick in the air as they entered the town hall. Ronan had never cared much for politics, but this wasn't just about land. It was about people. Everett was already there, standing near the front with his usual polished confidence. He offered Selene a smirk as she walked in, as if he'd already won. Selene ignored him. She wasn't here to play his game. The meeting began, and Everett wasted no time making his case. "The reality is, family farms are struggling," he said smoothly, addressing the room. "I have a plan that will modernize agriculture in this county, increase profits, and ensure that we aren't left behind." Ronan clenched his fists. Every word out of Everett's mouth was a lie. Selene finally stood. "What you're proposing isn't modernization, it's consolidation. You don't care about family farms, you care about your bottom line." Everett gave her a practiced smile. "And what's your alternative, Selene? Keep struggling, keep patching up broken tractors and hoping for a miracle?" The room fell silent. Selene didn't hesitate. "No," she said firmly. "I plan to expand production, diversify our crops and bring in new business, on our terms, not yours." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Farmers exchanged glances. Everett frowned, as if this was not the answer he expected. One of the farmers stood. "Selene, how do you plan to do that?" Selene squared her shoulders. "By proving that family farms can still thrive, by showing investors that we're worth something, that our way of life still matters." Everett scoffed. "And what investors are you referring to?" Selene lifted her chin. "That's for me to worry about." Ronan watched as the tide began to turn. Selene wasn't just standing up for herself, she was standing up for everyone in that room, and for the first time, Everett didn't look quite as sure of himself. As they drove back to Whitmore Acres, the tension in Selene's shoulders finally eased. "You held your own back there," Ronan said, breaking the silence. Selene smirked. "I always do." He chuckled. "Yeah, I'm starting to see that." They drove in silence for a few more minutes before Selene finally spoke again, softer this time. "Thank you." Ronan turned to her. "For what?" She exhaled. "For not trying to fight my battles for me." Ronan shrugged. "Didn't have to. You were doing just fine on your own." For a long time, Selene had believed she had to carry everything alone. But tonight, with Ronan beside her, she realized maybe she didn't have to, and that was something worth holding on to. The next morning, Whitmore Acres woke to a battle yet to be fought. The air was thick with purpose, and even the land seemed to hum with the energy of something shifting, something unseen but deeply felt. Selene had made her stand. Now she had to prove she could back it up. Ronan Hale had spent enough time in places where the odds were stacked against him. He knew what it looked like when a person was fighting for something bigger than themselves, and he saw it now in the way Selene Whitmore carried herself. Determination set in every step, her hands curled into fists as she mapped out what needed to be done. Selene stood at the center of the barn, surrounded by her workers and a few neighboring farmers who had come after the town meeting. She laid out her strategy with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for this fight. "If Everett wants to play dirty, then we don't give him the chance," she said. "We push ahead with the expansion, faster than he expects. That means doubling down on production, getting our name in front of investors, and proving we're not going anywhere." Boone nodded, arms crossed. "And how do we pull that off before the rezoning vote?" Selene glanced at Ronan. He raised an eyebrow. "I have a feeling I'm about to be volunteered for something," she smirked. "You did say you liked a challenge." Ronan exhaled, glancing around. "All right, what are we looking at?" Selene's voice was steady. "We overhaul the entire irrigation system. If we can increase efficiency and yield, we prove to investors that we're sustainable long-term. We get ahead of Everett's propaganda and give people something they can believe in." Boone let out a low whistle. "That's one hell of a plan, Whitmore." Selene crossed her arms. "It's not just a plan, it's the only way we win." The next few days were a blur of relentless work. Ronan spent every waking hour tearing apart the old irrigation system, installing new pipes, adjusting pressure valves, making sure every inch of the land was getting what it needed to thrive. Selene was right there with him, elbow deep in the work, refusing to let anyone fight her battle for her. Lily followed them both like a shadow, handing Ronan tools, fetching water for the workers, doing whatever small thing she could to help. Boone coordinated with the farmhands, training them to handle the new system, and Selene was the force holding it all together. Even as exhaustion settled into their bones, they didn't stop, because stopping meant losing. By the fourth day, progress was undeniable. The new system was working. The fields were already responding, the soil drinking in the water like a long-awaited gift. But then the sabotage happened. Ronan had just finished tightening the last set of valves when he noticed it. A deliberate cut in one of the main lines. The water pressure was dropping, pooling in the wrong areas. Boone swore under his breath. This wasn't an accident. Selene's eyes flashed with anger. "Everett!" Ronan clenched his fists. He should have seen this coming. Everett wasn't just going to wait for the rezoning to happen. He was going to make sure they failed. Before it did, Selene turned to him. "How bad is it?" Ronan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "We can fix it, but it'll take time." Selene's jaw tightened. "Then we don't waste a second." There was no hesitation in her voice. Ronan looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something settle in his chest. She was fire and steel, and he'd follow her into battle any damn day. The sun had long since disappeared behind the hills by the time Ronan, Boone, and a handful of workers were knee-deep in the fields, patching the damage Everett's men had done. Selene refused to stand back and watch. She was right there in the dirt, hands raw, clothes soaked in mud, refusing to let Everett's interference break her. Ronan stole a glance at her. the way the moonlight traced the sharp angles of her face, the fierce determination in her eyes. She caught him looking. "Something on your mind, Hale?" he smirked. "Just wondering if you ever take a break." Celine let out a soft laugh, not the polished kind, but the real kind. Not when everything's on the line. Ronan leaned on his shovel, studying. "Her. You ever wonder if it's worth it?" Her expression sobered. "Every day." A beat of silence passed, but she continued, voice steady. "Quitting isn't an option." Ronan nodded slowly. He understood that, more than she knew. By the time the last valve was secured, the sun was creeping up over the horizon, bathing Whitmore Acres in soft, golden light. Celine exhaled slowly, staring at the repaired system. "It's done," she murmured. Ronan stretched his sore muscles. "It's holding steady. Should be good as new." She turned to him then, something unspoken in her gaze. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. Ronan smirked. "What, and miss all the fun?" Celine shook her head. "I mean it. You could have walked away. This isn't your fight." Ronan held her gaze, his next words deliberate, certain. "It is now." Celine stilled, as if those words carried more weight than he realized, and maybe they did, because for the first time since Ronan had arrived at Whitmore Acres, he wasn't just a mechanic, a farmhand, or a man passing through. He was part of this. Whitmore Acres had seen its fair share of battles, but this felt like a war. The sun sat low on the horizon, casting long amber shadows across the freshly repaired irrigation system. The farm was holding steady, but so was Everett Monroe. His tactics were getting bolder, and now that sabotage was in play, there was no telling what he would try next. Celine Whitmore stood near the barn, her arms crossed as she surveyed the land. There was something unwavering in her stance, but even Ronan could see the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. "You should get some rest," he said, stepping beside her. Celine let out a short, humorless laugh. "Rest? That's funny." Ronan tilted his head, studying her. "You can't run on fumes forever, Whitmore." She turned to him, and for the first time in a long time, there was a crack in her armor. Not weakness, just something real. "I can't stop," she admitted. "Not when we're this close." Ronan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, well, you can't win a fight if you collapse in the middle of it." She exhaled, rubbing her temples. She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Never mind." Ronan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Say it." She hesitated, then finally met his gaze. "What if I lose?" Ronan held her stare, his next words slow and certain. "Then you get back up and fight again." Something in her expression flickered, like she wasn't used to hearing that from someone who actually meant it. A long silence stretched between them before Celine exhaled and turned back toward the land. "I don't know how to do that with someone else beside me," Ronan smirked. "Then I guess you're learning." The next morning, Boone strode into the barn, his face dark with frustration. "Everett's here." Celine stiffened. "Where?" Boone jerked his head toward the driveway. "Pulled up in his fancy car 5 minutes ago. He's waiting on the porch." Ronan didn't miss the way Celine's hands clenched at her sides. She squared her shoulders, already preparing for battle. "Let's get this over with," she muttered, marching toward the house. Ronan followed, keeping pace beside her. Everett was waiting, leaning casually against the wooden railing of the farmhouse porch. He looked too polished for a place like this, like he'd just stepped out of a boardroom rather than into the heart of the American countryside. "Celine," he greeted smoothly. "I was just admiring the view. Must be nice, standing on all this land." Celine didn't bother with pleasantries. "If you're here to waste my time, don't," Everett sighed, shaking his head. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." She folded her arms. "Good." Ronan had to fight the smirk that threatened to form. She was fire and steel, and Everett didn't know what to do with that. Everett's gaze flicked toward Ronan. "And you?" Still playing farmhand, I see. Ronan smiled, all sharp edges. And you're still trying to buy your way into places you don't belong. Everett's expression barely shifted, but Ronan could tell he'd struck a nerve. Selene took a step forward. If you have something to say, say it. Everett exhaled, feigning disappointment. I was hoping to have a civilized discussion, but fine. Here it is. I'm offering you one last chance to sell before the rezoning vote happens. Once it does, you'll be stuck playing by my rules. Selene's jaw clenched. I'd rather burn this place to the ground than hand it over to you. Everett's smirk faltered for just a second before he recovered. You always were dramatic. He straightened his suit jacket. I'll see you at the vote, Selene. Try not to make a fool of yourself. With that, he turned and strolled back to his car, his presence like a stain on the land that didn't belong. As soon as he was gone, Ronan turned to Selene. He's getting desperate. Selene nodded, exhaling. Which means we're doing something right. That evening, the farm was quiet. Too quiet. Ronan found Selene sitting on the porch, a mug of coffee cradled between her hands. The tension was still there, but there was something else, too, something uncertain. He sat down beside her, stretching his legs out. She didn't speak for a long time, just stared out at the fields. Finally, she broke the silence. I can't remember the last time I had someone standing beside me in a fight like this. Ronan studied her profile. The sharp edges softened. By exhaustion, the way she carried everything, like she was afraid to let go. You're not alone in this, he said. Not anymore. She turned to look at him then, and for the first time, there was no resistance in her gaze, just something raw, something real. Ronan wasn't sure who moved first, if it was him leaning in or her letting him. But the next thing he knew, their lips met. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was something earned, something inevitable. When they finally pulled apart, Selene let out a small breath, like she wasn't sure whether to regret it or do it again. Ronan smirked. So, does this mean I'm officially a hired? Selene laughed softly, shaking her head. You've been hired since the moment you fixed that tractor. He chuckled. Good to know. A comfortable silence settled between them. Tomorrow the fight would continue. The rezoning vote was looming, and Everett Monroe wasn't going down without a final blow. But for now, just for tonight, Whitmore Acres felt like home. And maybe, just maybe, Ronan Hale had finally found a place worth staying. The morning of the rezoning vote dawned crisp and clear, the sky painted in streaks of amber and gold. It was the kind of day that made Whitmore Acres feel timeless, a land untouched by greed or industry, just honest open fields stretching toward the horizon. But the future of that land was far from certain. Selene Whitmore stood on the porch, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, staring out over the fields she had spent her whole life protecting. Everything came down to today. She felt Ronan's presence before she saw him. He stepped beside her, leaning against the wooden railing, his gaze steady. Nervous? He asked. She exhaled. More than I want to admit. Ronan smirked. Good. Means it's worth fighting for. She glanced at him then, and the quiet confidence in his eyes steadied her. It wasn't just her fight anymore. She wasn't alone. The town hall was packed, the energy in the room electric with tension. Farmers, business owners, and residents filled the wooden pews, murmuring among themselves. Everett Monroe stood near the front, dressed in his usual polished arrogance, shaking hands and flashing smiles like a politician who had already won. Selene took her seat, Ronan beside her, Boone just behind them. The battle lines had been drawn. Now, it was time to see which side had the numbers. The county commissioner, an older man with weathered hands that spoke of a life spent working the land, stepped forward. We're here today to vote on the proposed rezoning of several agricultural properties, including Whitmore Acres. The murmurs grew louder. Everett stood, clearing his throat. If I may, he said smoothly. The commissioner nodded, and Everett turned to address the crowd. "This is an opportunity," Everett began, his voice silk-wrapped steel. "Modernization is the future. Family farms are struggling, but with the right investors, we can ensure that this county thrives." Celine clenched her fists. Everett smiled, as if he'd already won. "Rezoning will allow us to bring in new businesses, create jobs, and strengthen our economy. This isn't about taking away land, it's about progress." Murmurs of agreement and dissent rippled through the crowd. Then Celine stood, the room quieted. She turned, her voice clear, unwavering. "Progress is meaningless if it comes at the cost of what makes this place home." She swept her gaze across the room, meeting the eyes of every farmer, every neighbor. Whitmore Acres isn't just a farm. It's a legacy, a promise. It's proof that family farms can survive, not because they're relics, but because they matter. A few nods. A murmur of agreement. Celine lifted her chin. "Everett wants you to believe that we have to sell out to stay afloat, that we can't do this without him. But I'm standing here today to tell you, we don't need to be rescued. We need to be believed in." Boone let out a gruff sound of approval, and from the back of the room, applause began to spread. Everett's jaw tightened. "That's a nice speech, Celine, but emotions don't change numbers." Celine didn't back down. "No, but hard work does, and that's exactly what we're doing at Whitmore Acres." She took a deep breath. "I've secured investors who believe in keeping family farms alive. They see the value in what we're building here." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Everett's smirk faltered. "What?" Celine smiled for the first time that morning. "Whitmore Acres is expanding. We're bringing in new crops, new partnerships, and new ways to make sure our land thrives without selling our souls to corporate greed." The applause grew louder. Everett's expression darkened. The commissioner raised his hand for silence. "We'll proceed with the vote." Celine held her breath. The roll call began. One by one, the town voted against rezoning. Celine's grip on the chair tightened. One by one, the names were called, and then the final vote. A gavel struck wood. The proposal for rezoning has been denied. A cheer erupted in the room. Ronan turned to Celine, a slow, proud grin spreading across his face. She had won. Whitmore Acres had won. Everett stormed out, his face red with frustration, but Celine didn't care, because she had just saved her home. That night Whitmore Acres came alive. A celebration filled the barn, laughter and music drifting into the cool night air. The farmhands, neighbors and friends toasted to victory, and for the first time in a long time, Celine let herself breathe. She stepped outside, away from the noise, looking out over her land, the land that would stay hers. Ronan found her there, hands in his pockets, a knowing look in his eyes. "You did it," he said. Celine exhaled, shaking her head with a soft smile. "We did it." A comfortable silence stretched between them. Then Ronan took a step closer. "So, what happens now?" Celine turned to him. "Now we rebuild, stronger, smarter, better," Ronan chuckled. "And where do I fit into that?" She met his gaze, her heart steady, certain. "You stay." The word hung between them, soft, hopeful, real. Ronan searched her face, then closed the space between them, tilting his head down until their foreheads touched. "I was already planning on it," he murmured. Celine laughed softly, a sound that felt like home. And when he kissed her, it wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise that this land, this life, this love was worth fighting for. And that, my friends, is the story of struggling single dad helps repair a farmer's tractor, unaware she owns fields of America's heartland, But before we go, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from the heartland of America, a quiet countryside, or maybe a bustling city dreaming of open fields? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, inspired you, or simply gave you a moment of warmth in your day, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another uplifting story like this. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.